Injustice doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It creeps in, disguised as a routine, normalized by silence, and justified by those in power. And it thrives. It thrives when we stop asking questions, when we accept it, when we fail to confront it. This brings us to a crossroad. When faced with injustice, what do we do? Some take to the streets, protest, marches, and rallies. They force society to pay attention and amplify voices that would otherwise remain unheard. But protests can lose momentum and their focus. They can be dismissed as noise. I know that. Others, they turn to the courts, they fight legal battles using laws and precedents to challenge injustice. But this requires resources, knowledge, and above all, faith in institutions that often seem indifferent to the struggles of the marginalized. And then there's the most dangerous possibility. We normalize it. We move on. We tell ourselves that's just the way things are. I want to propose a fourth way, a way rooted in dissent but guided by the Constitution, a way I call constitutional activism. What is constitutional activism? It's not just about filing cases or organizing protests. It's about bringing the gap between the ideals of the Constitution and the lived realities of the people. It's about ensuring that the promises of justice, equality, and dignity reach the last person in the last village. Let me show you what this looks like through stories. Stories of ordinary people who stood against extraordinary odds. Stories of the cases I handled as advocate. In 2016, I was approached by a retired colonel seeking help for two men, Ashraf and Kismat. They had been detained in Assam for 3 years after being declared illegal immigrants in an ex parte proceedings. Decisions that were made without giving them a chance to be heard. Now we examined their documents and discovered that they were originally from Gaya in Bihar. They were Indian citizens who had migrated to Assam years ago. So we filed a petition in the Supreme Court. We framed the case not as a plea for mercy, but as a question of constitutional rights, as a question of justice. We invoked the right to equality, the right to life, and above all, the rule of law. The Supreme Court ordered a CBI inquiry, and this is where Ashraf's wife, Tara, stepped forward. Tara, a young mother of two, didn't wait for justice to find her. She traveled across Bihar and Uttar Pradesh from Assam, mobilizing people to testify to her husband's citizenship. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a fight for her family's survival, and her courage paid off. The CBI confirmed Ashraf and Kismat's citizenship, and after 5 years of separation, they were finally reunited with their families. Ashraf sent me a photo of himself with his 6-year-old daughter on his shoulders, standing in front of their small pan stall, their life pieced together again. After the dust settled on this, Tara visited me in Delhi. She came bearing gift of a blazer that still doesn't fit. But that is a trophy that I hang very proudly. That is the biggest feast I have ever received. Anywho, the story doesn't end here. Tara becomes a grassroots activist even after all that she has endured. Today, she helps marginalized people navigate the labyrinth of citizenship documentation. This is what constitutional activism does. It turns ordinary people like Tara into extraordinary champions of justice. Now, let me take you to Karnataka, where young girls were told they couldn't wear their hijabs to school. When we challenged this prohibition, we didn't stop at arguing for religious freedom. We asked a deeper question. What right does the state have to force young girls to choose between their right to education and their right to dignity? It wasn't just about a piece of cloth. It was about autonomy, equality, and the fundamental role of the state in our democracy. The Constitution doesn't just guarantee rights, it protects the spaces in which we live those rights. It reminds us that the state is not an enforcer, it is a servant of the people. But here's the thing, the Constitution is stronger than any bulldozer, any mob, any act of injustice. Which brings me to one of the starkest forms of injustice we face today, mob lynchings. Between 2010 and 2017, 63 incidents of cow-related mob violence claimed 28 lives. And 97% of these attacks occurred after 2014. These aren't random acts of violence. They are deliberate. They target marginalized communities and genders to send a chilling message. You do not belong. In 2018, we brought the issue of mob lynching before the Supreme Court. We framed lynchings not as communal violence, but as a constitutional crisis. We argued that these acts violated the fundamental rights to life, equality, and dignity. We invoked the principle of constitutional morality, which requires us to rise above societal prejudices and adhere to the ideals of justice, liberty, and fraternity. The Supreme Court responded by issuing guidelines to curb mob violence. It was a success for us, and for a brief period, there was lull in mob lynchings. But 6 months later, I saw a report on the lynching of Tabriz Ansari in Jharkhand. It was buried on page 13 of a national daily. That placement, that normalization of horror was a wake-up call. It reminded me that even the most progressive court judgments mean nothing without implementation. This realization led to the creation of the Indian Civil Liberties Union. Constitutional activism is different. It doesn't stop at the courtroom door. It ensures that justice, equality, and dignity reach the streets, the villages, the margins. It demands that the promise of the Constitution be fulfilled, not just in theory, but in practice. Take Ganesh Gupta, for instance. Ganesh owned a small juice shop in a bustling neighborhood in Delhi. One day, his shop, like many others, was demolished as part of a so-called anti-encroachment drive. Our team reached out to Ganesh, and we represented him in litigation against these demolitions. This fight was not about identity. It was about protecting the rule of law and ensuring that every citizen, regardless of their background, has access to justice. This is what we fight for. Not for one community, but for the idea that justice, equality, and dignity are universal. Supreme Court issued guidelines with regard to bulldozer justice also very recently. And it's a brilliant guidelines. Anyway, in all these cases, we didn't argue the loudest, but we argued the smartest. Constitutional activism needs action. So here's what you can do. Number one, educate yourself and others. Learn about the Constitution and your rights. Share this knowledge with your family, friends, and communities. Learn at least the part 3 of the Constitution. Second, document and amplify. If you witness injustice, document it. Visibility challenges silence. Third, engage locally. Help marginalized communities navigate systems. Sometimes just showing up can mean everything. Hold institutions accountable. Demand transparency through RTIs, letters, or public pressure. Support and volunteer with grassroots organizations. Contribute time, skills, or resources to groups fighting injustice. Most importantly, be persistent. Justice takes time, but every small step matters. The Constitution doesn't need us to believe in it passively. It needs us to live it actively. So let me leave you with this. Justice is not a privilege, it's a promise. And every time we fight for that promise, Every time we resist the normalization of injustice, we inch closer to the India envisioned in the Constitution, envisioned by our founding fathers. And let us walk out of this room not just inspired, but resolved to act. Because together, we are stronger than any bulldozer, any mob, and any act of injustice. And together, we can ensure that the light of the Constitution reaches every corner of this country. Thank you.